Hey, I was reading about the concept of teaching aptitude the other day, and it got me thinking about what it really takes to be a good teacher. Have you come across that term before?
Oh, definitely. Teaching aptitude refers to developing the necessary abilities and skills required to be an effective teacher. It's all about having the right mindset and skills to impart knowledge, understanding, and skills to students.
Exactly. And teaching itself is quite structured. It's a planned and coordinated act of sharing knowledge and experience. The primary role of a teacher is to guide students and help them gain both knowledge and skills.
True. A good teacher doesn't just dump information. They enhance the learning experience by engaging students and ensuring they understand the subject matter. Speaking of which, have you read about the different philosophies of education?
Yes, I have. There are quite a few philosophies that shape how education is perceived and delivered. For instance, idealism emphasizes the role of the universal mind, or God, in understanding the world. Philosophers like Froebel, Kant, Plato, Swami Dayanand, Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo are known for advocating this philosophy.
Right, and on the other hand, naturalism focuses on nature as the ultimate reality. Thinkers like Tagore, Rousseau, and Herbert Spencer are main proponents of this view. They believe that education should be in harmony with the natural world.
Then there's pragmatism, which is all about utility and practical outcomes. According to this philosophy, what is useful is good, and what is good is useful. John Dewey, Kilpatrick, and Mead are some of the key figures in this school of thought.
It's fascinating how these philosophies influence teaching methods. For instance, the nature of teaching itself is quite complex. It's triadic in nature, involving three core elements: the teacher, the student, and the subject matter.
Exactly. Teaching and learning are interrelated processes. The goal of teaching is to bring about positive transformations in students, enhancing their knowledge and skills. However, it's not just a one-way street. Teachers learn too.
That's a great point. Teachers are constantly learning and evolving as they teach. It's a lifelong process, really. Both teachers and students continuously enrich their knowledge and understanding.
Absolutely. That reminds me of the TL model of teaching. It emphasizes that teaching and learning are integrally related acts. Teaching aims at learning, and it even causes learning to occur. It's a deeply connected process.
That's why different pedagogical models are so important. For instance, the pedagogy model is very much trainer-led. The learner is dependent on the teacher, who decides what and how to learn. Motivation in this model usually comes from external sources.
Right. The andragogy model, on the other hand, is more about self-directed and goal-driven learning. Here, learners are more independent, acting as problem solvers and seeking guidance rather than direct instruction. Motivation tends to be more intrinsic.
And then there's the hudagogy model, which is about self-determined learning. Learners in this model know their destination, are problem finders, and take full responsibility for their learning. It's about being inquiry-driven, with motivation stemming from the experience of learning itself.
Each model really caters to different types of learners and learning situations. It's interesting how the role of the teacher and learner shifts depending on the model.
Hey, take a look at this pyramid diagram I found. It's about different levels of teaching approaches. It seems to align with what we discussed earlier about pedagogy, andragogy, and hudagogy.
Interesting. Let's break it down. So, at the bottom, we have level 1, pedagogy, which is focused on engagement. It seems to require a lot of instructor control and course structuring, with less autonomy required from the learner.
Right. Pedagogy is the traditional teaching approach where the teacher decides what and how to learn, and the learner is more dependent. It's primarily used for children or situations where learners need more guidance and structure.
Exactly. Moving up, we have level 2, andragogy. It's about cultivation, which means it's more learner-centered. Learners here are a bit more mature and independent, taking on more responsibility for their learning compared to pedagogy.
Andragogy indeed focuses on adult learning, where learners are expected to be self-directed. They're not just passive recipients of information, but are actively involved in their learning process. This approach uses strategies like role plays, simulations, and self-evaluation.
That makes sense. Then, at the top, we see Level 3, Pedagogy, which is all about realization. Here, the learners are expected to be fully autonomous, taking complete responsibility for their learning. There's minimal instructor control needed.
Yes, pedagogy is the most advanced form of learning. It's for learners who are self-determined and know how to find and solve problems on their own. They are inquiry-driven and motivated by the process of learning itself, not by external factors.
So, as we move up the pyramid, there's an increase in learner maturity and autonomy. At the same time, there's a decrease in the need for instructor control and structured courses. It's a gradual shift from dependence to complete independence.
That's a great observation. This pyramid really highlights how different teaching approaches cater to different levels of learner autonomy and maturity. It's fascinating how education evolves from being heavily teacher-led to being completely learner-driven.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that as educators or learners, we need to recognize where we stand on this pyramid and adapt our approaches accordingly. Whether we're teaching or learning, understanding these levels helps us make the most out of the educational experience.
Couldn't agree more. It's all about finding the right balance between guidance and autonomy to foster effective learning.
Hey, I came across some interesting questions about teaching and learning strategies today. One of them was about which field of study uses role-playing, simulation, and self-evaluation as strategies specifically for adult learners. Do you know the answer?
Yes, I think that would be andragogy. It's the field that focuses on adult education, where learners are more independent and the teaching strategies are designed to engage them actively. So, the answer would be option 2, andragogy.
That's right. And another question was about the field of study that deals with the methods and principles used in adult education. This one also seems to relate to andragogy.
Absolutely, that's also andragogy. It specifically looks at how adults learn differently than children, focusing on self-direction and the learner's experience. So, the correct answer here would be option 2, andragogy as well.
Exactly. Speaking of teaching, it's interesting how it differs from learning. Teaching is about giving lessons on a subject, whereas learning is about gaining knowledge through studying, being taught, or experiencing.
Right, and in the end, learning is actually more important because it's the ultimate goal of teaching. After all, students can learn without teachers, but teachers can't teach without learners.
That's a good point. And it's also crucial to distinguish between teaching and training. Teaching tends to be more theoretical and abstract, aiming to impart knowledge. In contrast, training is hands-on and practical, focusing on developing specific abilities.
Exactly, and when we talk about instruction, it's more about providing step-by-step directions for completing a task. It's directive, with a one-way flow of information from instructor to learner. On the other hand, teaching is more cooperative, involving guidance and feedback where both the teacher and learner are actively engaged.
I see what you mean. That reminds me of how teaching also differs from counseling. Counseling is about listening, guiding, and empowering the client, while teaching is more about directing an action.
And don't forget about conditioning. Unlike teaching, which focuses on understanding and critical thinking, conditioning involves a behavioral process where a response becomes more frequent or predictable due to reinforcement.
Yes, and there's also a big difference between teaching and indoctrination. Indoctrination involves teaching someone to accept a set of beliefs without questioning, while teaching encourages understanding and critical thinking.
That's true. And then there's the question of the goal of teaching compared to training. Teaching aims to provide opportunities for critical and creative reflection, as opposed to just promoting organized ideas or establishing beliefs.
Exactly. And when considering the direction of influence, in counseling, it's more two-way, while in teaching, it tends to be one-way, where the teacher is the main source of information.
Right. Teaching also differs from training and conditioning in that it promotes critical thinking rather than just disciplined drill or mastery of facts. Teaching encourages students to think critically and creatively.
Definitely. And the modality of teaching has to be differentiated from training or instructing based on learning outcomes. Teaching emphasizes critical and creative thinking, while training might focus more on disciplined behavior or quick feedback.
It's fascinating how each approach has its unique purpose and impact on learning. Understanding these differences really helps in choosing the right method for different learning scenarios.
Absolutely. It all comes down to understanding the needs of the learner and the goals of the educational process. Whether it's teaching, training, instructing, or counseling, each has its place in the learning journey.
Hey, I've been diving into some cognitive theories lately, and it's fascinating how they explain the way we think and learn. Have you read about Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development?
Yes, I have. Piaget's theory is quite interesting. It's all about how children move through different stages of cognitive development as they grow. Each stage represents a different way of thinking and understanding the world. Do you remember the stages?
Absolutely. There are 4 stages. The first one is the sensoromotor stage, from birth to about 2 years old. During this stage, infants learn about the world through their senses and actions. A big milestone here is developing object permanence, where they realize that objects continue to exist even when they can't see them.
Right, and then there's the preparational stage from ages 2 to 7. In this stage, children start using language and thinking symbolically, but their thinking is still quite intuitive and egocentric. They often struggle with understanding other people's perspectives.
Exactly. After that comes the concrete operational stage, which is from 7 to 11 years old. This is when children begin thinking logically about concrete events. They understand concepts like conservation, which means realizing that quantity doesn't change even when the shape does.
And finally, the formal operational stage, starting at around 12 years old and continuing into adulthood. This stage is marked by the ability to think abstractly and systematically solve problems. Adolescents in this stage can understand hypothetical situations and think logically about potential outcomes.
It's amazing how Piaget's stages show that cognitive development is a progressive process of reorganizing mental activities. He really emphasized that children actively construct their understanding of the world through their experiences.
Definitely. And speaking of different ways of thinking, have you heard about Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences? It's another cognitive theory that challenges the traditional view of intelligence.
Yes, Gardner proposed that intelligence isn't just a single ability but a variety of distinct intelligences. He identified 8 different types, like linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic intelligence.
That's right. Gardner's theory suggests that everyone has a unique combination of these intelligences. For example, someone might be strong in musical intelligence, meaning they have a natural ability for music, while another person might excel in logical mathematical intelligence, making them great with numbers and reasoning.
It's such a refreshing way to think about intelligence, isn't it? It really emphasizes that people have different strengths and that education should cater to these diverse intelligences rather than just focusing on traditional academic skills.
I completely agree. And then there's Wolfgang Kohler's insight theory, which adds another layer to our understanding of cognitive processes. His work with chimpanzees showed that learning can happen through sudden insight, not just through trial and error.
Yes. Kohler's experiments demonstrated that problem-solving could be a cognitive process involving an aha moment where the solution suddenly becomes clear. It's all about visualizing the problem and mentally manipulating information to come up with a solution.
It's interesting how Kohler's insight theory challenged the behaviorist idea that learning is just about conditioning and responses to stimuli. He showed that animals, and by extension humans, can solve problems through understanding and insight.
Exactly. All these theories, Piaget's stages of cognitive development, Gardner's multiple intelligences, and Kohler's insight theory, highlight the importance of cognitive processes in learning. They remind us that learning is not just a behavioral change, but a complex cognitive activity.
That's so true. Understanding these cognitive theories can really help educators create more effective teaching strategies that cater to different learning styles and promote deeper understanding.
Absolutely. It's all about recognizing the diverse ways people learn and finding the best methods to support that learning. These cognitive theories give us a great foundation to build on.
Hey, I've been exploring social constructionist theories lately, and they're really fascinating. Have you read about these theories and how they emphasize the importance of social contexts in learning?
Yes, I have. Social constructionist theories are all about how learning is fundamentally a social process. They suggest that our understanding and knowledge are constructed through social interactions and shared experiences. One of the key figures in this area is Lev Vygotsky. Have you looked into his work?
Absolutely. Vygotsky's work is quite influential, especially his constructivist theory. He believed that cognitive development is heavily influenced by social interactions and cultural tools. According to Vygotsky, learning happens first on a social level and then on an individual level. He called this process social construction.
That's right. Vygotsky emphasized that children learn through interactions with more knowledgeable others, like parents, teachers, or peers. These interactions help children internalize new knowledge and skills. This is different from Piaget's view, which focuses more on individual cognitive development.
Exactly. And one of Vygotsky's most famous concepts is the zone of proximal development, ZPD. Have you heard about it?
Yes, the ZPD is such a powerful concept. It refers to the difference between what a learner can do independently and what they can do with guidance and support from a more knowledgeable other. Vygotsky argued that learning occurs in this zone. The idea is that when learners are given just the right amount of support, or scaffolding, they can achieve tasks they wouldn't be able to do on their own.
Exactly. It's like a sweet spot for learning. The ZPD highlights the importance of social interaction in education. By working within the ZPD, teachers can provide the right amount of challenge and support, helping students progress to higher levels of understanding and skill.
And that's where progressive education comes in, right? John Dewey, another prominent figure in educational theory, really championed the idea of learning through experience and interaction. He believed that education should be student-centered and that learning should be connected to real-life experiences.
Absolutely. Dewey's progressive education model emphasizes experiential learning, where students learn by doing. He argued that education is not just preparation for life but life itself. According to Dewey, the classroom should be a community where students engage in democratic practices, collaborate on projects, and solve real-world problems.
Dewey's ideas align well with the concept of cooperative learning, don't they? Cooperative learning is all about students working together in small groups to achieve shared learning goals. It's a great way to encourage social interaction and build a sense of community in the classroom.
Definitely. Cooperative learning emphasizes collaboration and mutual support among students. In a cooperative learning environment, students learn from each other and help each other succeed. This method promotes not just academic achievement, but also social and communication skills, which are essential for personal and professional growth.
That makes sense. And it's interesting how these theories connect to Dale's cone of experience. Have you heard about Dale's cone?
Yes, Dale's cone of experience is a model that illustrates the different ways we can experience learning and how these methods impact our retention of information. The cone suggests that people retain more information through active participation in hands-on experiences than through passive methods like reading or listening.
Right. At the bottom of Dale's cone, we have direct, purposeful experiences, like doing a real task, which involve active participation and lead to the highest retention rates. As you move up the cone, the experiences become more abstract, like watching demonstrations, listening to lectures, or reading, which tend to result in lower retention rates.
Exactly. The cone of experience supports the idea that the more actively involved learners are, the better they learn and retain information. This aligns with both Vygotsky's emphasis on social interaction and Dewey's focus on experiential learning. By engaging students in active learning experiences, educators can enhance understanding and retention.
It's all interconnected, isn't it? Vygotsky's and Dewey's theories both stress the importance of active, social, and experiential learning. Cooperative learning strategies and models like Dale's cone of experience further highlight that learning is most effective when it's engaging, interactive, and relevant to real life.
Absolutely. Understanding these theories can really help educators design learning experiences that are more meaningful and effective for students. By focusing on social interactions, hands-on activities, and real-world applications, we can create an environment where students not only learn but also enjoy the process of learning.
I couldn't agree more. These social constructionist theories remind us that education is not just about transmitting information, but about creating an environment where students can construct knowledge through experiences and interactions with others.
That's the essence of these theories, isn't it? Learning is a shared journey, and by fostering collaboration, critical thinking, and active participation, we can help students build deeper and more lasting understandings.
Exactly. And it's so rewarding to see how these concepts play out in the classroom, making learning a dynamic and engaging process for everyone involved.
Hey, I've been thinking about different teaching methods and how effective they are. Have you heard about Dale's Cone of Experience?
Yes, I have. Dale's Cone of Experience is a great tool for understanding how different instructional methods impact learning. It's a visual model that shows how we retain information based on how we experience it. The cone suggests that the most effective learning methods are those that involve direct, purposeful experiences.
Exactly. According to Dale's research, the least effective methods are at the top of the cone, like reading or listening to lectures, which are more passive forms of learning. The most effective methods, like direct experiences or simulations, are at the bottom. These methods are closer to real-life experiences and involve more active participation.
That makes sense. The cone also highlights that action learning techniques, which are hands-on and involve doing, result in up to 90% retention. It's fascinating how much better we learn when we're actively engaged.
It really is. Dale's Cone emphasizes the importance of perceptual learning styles, which are sensory-based. The more sensory channels we can engage while interacting with learning material, the better students will retain the information. For example, using visuals, sounds, and physical activities together can create a richer learning experience.
So true. Instructors can use a cone to design instructional activities that build upon students' direct experiences and encourage active participation. By incorporating activities like simulations, role-playing, or hands-on experiments, educators can create a more engaging and effective learning environment.
That's a great point. Speaking of engaging learning methods, have you heard about connectionism theories? These theories use mathematical models, like connectionist networks or artificial neural networks, to study human cognition.
Yes, connectionism is really interesting. It's based on the idea that our brain works like a network of interconnected neurons. Learning happens when these connections are strengthened or weakened based on experiences. One of the well-known theories under connectionism is Thorndike's trial and error theory.
Right, Thorndike's theory is all about learning through trial and error. When a learner is faced with a problem and no ready-made solution is available, they try different solutions until they find one that works. It's a process of eliminating errors or irrelevant responses to eventually discover the correct solution.
That's true. It's like how we learn to ride a bike. We might fall a few times, but with each fall, we adjust our approach until we find the right balance and coordination. It's a very hands-on way of learning that aligns well with Dale's Cone of Experience.
Absolutely. And then there's the heuristic strategy method. The word heuristic comes from the Greek word heurisko, which means I find or I discover. This method encourages students to adopt the attitude of discoverers rather than passive recipients of knowledge.
That's right. The heuristic method of teaching, especially in science, was proposed by H.E. Armstrong. He believed that students should be placed in the position of original investigators, finding things out for themselves rather than being told about them. This approach promotes active learning and critical thinking, much like the lower levels of Dale's Cone.
Exactly. The heuristic method really aligns with the idea of creating meaningful learning experiences that involve discovery and exploration. It's all about fostering curiosity and encouraging students to think for themselves.
And that brings us to behaviorism theories, which take a different approach to learning. Behaviorism focuses on observable behaviors and how they are influenced by external stimuli. One of the foundational theories in behaviorism is Watson's SR theory, or stimulus response theory.
Yes, Watson's theory is based on the idea that all behavior is a response to a stimulus. It emphasizes the relationship between the stimulus and the response it elicits. Learning, according to this theory, is the result of forming associations between stimuli and responses.
Exactly. And then we have Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning, which is another key behaviorist theory. Pavlov's experiments with dogs demonstrated how a neutral stimulus, when paired repeatedly with an unconditioned stimulus, could eventually elicit a conditioned response.
Right, that's the classic example of the bell ringing and the dog salivating. Initially, the bell was a neutral stimulus, but after being paired with the presentation of food, it became a conditioned stimulus that caused the dog to salivate even without the food.
It's a great example of how behavior can be conditioned through association. And then there's B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, which focuses on how behavior is shaped by rewards and punishments. Skinner believed that behaviors followed by positive reinforcement are likely to be repeated, while those followed by punishment are less likely to be repeated.
Yes, Skinner's work introduced the concept of reinforcement and its role in shaping behavior. He showed that learning can be influenced by the consequences of our actions, which is a bit different from classical conditioning, where the focus is more on association.
Exactly. And lastly, we have Kurt Lewin's change model, which is a bit different, but still relevant to behaviorism. Lewin's model is about understanding and managing change. It consists of 3 steps: unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. It's often used in organizational behavior, but also has applications in education.
That's right. Lewin's model is all about creating a willingness to change, implementing the change, and then making the change stick. It's useful for understanding how to manage behavioral change, whether it's in a classroom or a corporate setting.
It's interesting how all these theories, whether it's connectionism, behaviorism, or social constructionism, provide different perspectives on learning and behavior. They remind us that learning is a complex process influenced by a variety of factors, from social interactions to neurological processes and behavioral conditioning.
Absolutely. As educators, understanding these theories can help us create more effective teaching strategies that cater to different learning styles and needs. Whether we're focusing on hands-on experiences, encouraging discovery, or using reinforcement, each approach has its place in the learning process.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about finding the right balance and using a combination of methods to engage students and support their learning journey. By understanding these theories, we can be more intentional in how we teach and more responsive to our students' needs.